Hi guys, welcome back to Dungeons and Dry Brushing. My name is Daniel, and today we're going to be doing a quick but effective paint job on the barrier models that came with the Reaper 5 Kickstarter. I think these are technically spell effects as well because I think they're supposed to represent Wall of Stone and Wall of Thorns, but I like these a little bit better than the last ones personally because these can be used to add a bit of tactical interest to the battlefield, which is always great. So for the Thorn wall, we're going to be using some contrast paints, a bit of dry brushing, and some washes. And for the stone wall, it's going to be classic acrylic paints. Let's get started. I begin by priming the stone wall in dark gray. I can't advocate enough that if you're going to be getting into painting long term and you're intending to do large pieces like terrain or buildings, buy yourself some different colored spray paints to prime with. You'll save yourself both time and money in the long run. I want to base this wall with dark gray, so I just start with a dark gray primer. Color variety is important though, so I'm going to take some earthy colors and pick out a few stones in the wall. I'm using Pro Acryl's Burnt Orange and Burnt Red, as well as Army Painter's Dungeon Gray. Once that's dry, I use Army Painter's Drake Tooth to dry brush over the entire piece. Drake Tooth is a great color for things like this. It's an off-white that leans very slightly towards green. Now if this highlight looks too bright for you, then don't worry. It gets knocked back down with a wash in just a minute. So if you've watched my other videos, you probably know I'm actually a big advocate for oil washes, and a black oil wash would look great on this, but I actually want this to match the doors that I painted up in the first Dungeon Basics video, and I used gnome oil there. So I'm going to repeat that step here, but any wash, any black wash, whether it's dark tone or an oil wash or gnome oil, should look great on this. In this case, you can just sort of slather this on, make sure it hits everything, and leave it to dry. Since we're going to be using contrast paints on the Thorn wall, I've primed it with Wraithbone. As far as I've noticed, using the contrast-specific primers doesn't actually make any difference as long as you get a smooth coat. I use spray primers from a lot of different brands, a lot of different colors, and I've never had an issue with contrast or speed paints not working smoothly over it. But I do own Wraithbone, so why not? For the Thorn wall, I want to blend two contrast paints. I want to make the bottom of the thorns look dry and thick like they're old growth, so I'm using Wildwood Brown at the very bottom. That's going to come up to Plaguebearer Flesh at the midpoint. To wet blend them, you just want to feather your brush over the area where you're blending the colors together. You can always go back and forth on this, adding more green or more brown until you get a result you like. And don't worry if you're new to it and it doesn't turn out perfectly. We're going to dry brush over top of this and then hit it with a wash after, so that's going to cover up any mistakes. Anytime that you paint with contrast paints or speed paints and your intention is to layer up from them, you want to make sure to give it ample time to dry. Otherwise you're just going to damage the final result. So be patient, or if you can't be patient, just be somewhere else. Go do some housework, get some exercise. If you have children, you can go ask them if they're winning their online game. But if you can't leave it alone, just leave. I'm gonna go do the dishes, in fact. I'll see you in a minute. Once the contrast paints are fully dried, I'm going to use Drake Tooth again as a dry brush over the entirety of the vines. And then, after a little debate, I decided that I wanted to try a mix of Army Painter's Military Shader with just a tiny bit of their dark tone mixed in for the wash. This should bring some green back into the dry brushing and down into the parts we painted with wildwood, while still deepening the shadows and recesses. I also decided to take a wash called Targor Rage Shade, don't ask me why it's called that, I have no idea, and paint this just into the bottom third of the vines. This is kind of a purpley browny color, and I just thought it would be nice to add some visual interest to the most recessed parts of the model. And that just leaves one final part. There is a sculpted base on this model already, but I have a big tub of AK Interactive's wet ground. It looks great, it's extremely simple to use, and for the volume of it you get for the price, it's quite inexpensive. That said, there's nothing wrong with doing a brown base coat on the base, hitting it with a dark wash, and calling it a day. But this is a cool effect that has a lot of uses both in basing and terrain building, so I like to get it out sometimes when it's appropriate. And here we are, 2 more Reaper models down. The mountain of flat gray plastic is reduced just a little further. I'm quite happy with how these have turned out for such simple paint jobs, the Thorn wall especially, and I think they'll be quite functional actually. These will definitely find a spot somewhere on my table. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. If you could hit like and subscribe, even better. If you have any friends that you think might like the video, or enemies who might like it, feel free to recommend it to them. I'd really appreciate that too. Next week, I think we're getting back to the Dungeon Basics series, so we're going to be doing a bit more crafting. I'll see you there.